Have a look at this video. I expect women will realise before men what's going on here. Imagine you're in a bar waiting to meet a friend. A man takes an interest in you.
Right?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Hot, innit?
Better in the shade, yeah.
You've got supplies with your...
Yeah,
It's not much cool here.
Yeah.
Yeah, got enough, yeah?
Yeah.
What's your plans for the rest of the day? Are you going back? What's the plans for the rest of the afternoon? Anything that you tell us?
He invites himself to sit down.
Let me sit here with
Yeah,
you.
go for it. I think it's a good idea.
He plies you with compliments.
Well,
Very much believe that the world's a better place if everyone had a view and saying an opinion rather than not. Most people go home, don't they? Put Primary Street on and don't take notice what's going on around them, do they?
Oh, that's true.
Do you know what's going on here? This protester is being seduced.
Climate deniers and all the rest of it, which we all know is not. This is why we're here.
Yeah, no,
Days like this,
that's fine.
so-
No, I don't disagree with you.
You can relax. He's experienced this sort of thing.
What cause are you representing today? Because we've seen some Palestinian support group people up at the bridge.
Boston, yeah.
He does seem to ask a lot of questions though.
Yeah, I don't know what he.
And then you've got the Russian Against War lady, she's up there, who we work with quite closely. I don't know who are you representing today?
So we're XR.
Ed one here.
Yeah.
The local one? Southeast, XR Southeast, or the ones that are normally at the airport entrance?
Well, it's never the same people each time. That's where they want to
Same
come
group.
out. Yeah, it's all XR.
We are many.
Do we work with as well? He's the guy, one of the guys there.
Just in the nick of time, your friend arrives and the spell is broken. I think no comment can be a good thing to say at times like this. If it's none of my business, I think no comment can be a good thing to say at times like this.
And sorry, I mean, I don't want to be rude, but I'm going to have to say no comment because I'm actually trying to upload some pictures.
The man assures you he only had honourable intentions. He makes his excuses and leaves.
Okay, that's fine. I'm literally just making conversation. I'm not here to, I'm not writing anything down. I'm not recording anything. I'm just.
Has everyone in the group got enough water and stuff? Yeah, everyone has, okay.
Cool. Well, we'll go and top up our tans then. You don't want to talk to me? No, literally just for an interest point of view.
I know, but I actually
Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Most of this video is going to be based on my personal experience of police surveillance of peaceful protesters, and I was only ever the very most mild and half-hearted protester at that. Let's look back to our friend at the protest. Do you know what's going on? This police officer is called a police liaison officer. You can tell them because they always wear blue tops. They've had specialist training, and their job, as we'll see later on, their job is really to keep good communication open between the police and the protesters. They're not really meant to do intelligence. At the end of his section, he claims he was only having a social chat. Seems to me he was gathering intelligence. Have you spotted? He's decided to speak to that one individual protester because he doesn't know him. He knows the other protesters because they've been under surveillance. He knows all the other groups in the town.
We've seen some Palestinian, and then you've got the Russian Against War lady, she's up there, who we work with quite closely. Do we work with as well? He's the guy, one of the guys there.
Now, do you think by luck he just happens to be on duty and he happens to have a very good knowledge of the local protest groups? Or do you think the police keep it all recorded in a database so that if any time he moves to another role or he isn't available that day, any other police officer has access to that information? Photographs, names and video footage of people attending protests are routinely obtained by surveillance units and stored on an intelligence system. Details of protesters are stored on CrimInt, the general database used daily by all police staff to catalogue criminal intelligence. It lists campaigners by name, allowing police to search which demonstrations or political meetings individuals have attended. It shows police are interested in the names, clothing, whereabouts and personal details of protesters and journalists. And this police officer, he knows the individuals because he knows who to ask what's happening next in the protest.
What's your plans for the rest of the day?
Here he is at another protest way outside of his area, which he had quite a few miles to travel, and I think the public order police probably waited for him to arrive to assess which protesters were involved before they decided to act.
Is there anything how long are you going to be here? Or you don't know? Till whenever? Anyone else coming that you're aware of? And are these guys okay in terms of keeping warm and good welfare and drinks, and have you got what you need, like toilets, because we can sort of...
They always like to ask the same questions. What's happening next? What's happening later on? Who else is coming down? Where are you from? And as you can imagine, with modern computer systems, the amount of data the police are able to hold is huge. Court testimony by surveillance officers has confirmed the existence of a large intelligence system which, according to one officer, contains thousands of campaigners. And even completely law-abiding people are caught up in this database. Superintendent Hartshorn from Met's Public Order Branch conceded law-abiding campaigners were being added to the database, and the police aren't entirely straight about what they're doing. Police appear not to have disclosed to the court that they were transferring private details of campaigners to a database. Now I realise, as someone who's been surveilled, I'm going to be biased, so I'm also going to rely on two reports from official sources. One of them is the Getting the Balance Right report, published by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. So they're the legal independent authority that keeps an eye on the police. And the Protest Operational Advice document that's published by the National Police Chiefs Council. So they're the senior police officers that set the guidelines that are followed at a national level by the police in Britain. So those are the reliable sources. The police say they have legitimate reasons to want to understand what the protesters are doing. Police should educate themselves regarding the individuals, groups and groups within groups attending a protest in order to help identify a proportionate policing response. Where possible, this should include communication before, during and after an event, as well as other information collected in the run-up to the protest. The police have a legitimate need to know who's involved in the protest and what might be about to happen. And this brings us back to our friend, the police liaison officer, who we met at the beginning of the video. I'm going to call him George. That's not his real name, but that's what we'll call him. This is what the role of a police liaison officer should be. According to His Majesty's Inspectorate of Police, the College of Policing's APP outlines the role of a police liaison officer to provide a link through dialogue between the police and groups. However, police liaison teams are not deployed to gather intelligence.
Who are you representing today?
So we're XR.
Ed one here. The local one? Southeast, XR Southeast, or?
Over the years, the way the police deal with protests has evolved, and in the past it's been realised that sometimes protests have turned violent. For example, a famous one was the poll tax riot, I think it was 1990 in Trafalgar Square, and it all happened because the protesters thought they were about to be attacked by mounted police. So now there's police liaison officers to make sure there's good communication between the police and the protesters, but that's undermined if you use police liaison officers to gather intelligence, as we saw the protesters know to say no comment if they're being questioned by the police in that way. Well, in the past, I've seen police liaison officers go into the road and put themselves in physical danger to protect protesters. So like any other police officer, they need to be treated with respect, but I think in this case, by using them to collect intelligence, it undermines the confidence between the protesters and the police, which is why it's recommended to say no comment to them. If the police can't use police liaison officers to gather intelligence, what can they do? Well, they've got two other types of police officer. One is called the Forward Intelligence Team officers. They wear the ordinary police uniforms, so maybe they're less obvious. Forward Intelligence Team officers take notes of people's behaviour, appearance and associations, and where possible record their identity. They may be in ordinary police uniform and therefore less obvious than members of the evidence gathering team. And the evidence gathering team, where normally they're in pairs, they have orange epaulets. One will have a video camera and the other will be like a spotter. Obviously there are other ways for police to carry out surveillance on protesters, but they're quite limited because most protesters, even ones who carry out acts of civil disobedience, who deliberately break the law, are doing very minor things. So there's quite strict rules about what the police can and can't do. The police can use covert sensitive intelligence gathering methods to prevent protest-related crime and disorder if they meet stringent legal requirements. The police use most of these methods, such as directed surveillance, in a limited way. These directed surveillance techniques include things like undercover police officers, or maybe more proactively targeting your social media and your phone. The police can't normally do those because protesting, no matter what the government thinks, is quite a minor thing really. But if you'd like to become the head of the National Human Intelligence Unit, it's based in London, the Metropolitan Police, then the job's open now. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, it doesn't pay all that well, but you know, you might want to do that. So now we know all the rules about what the police can reasonably do to make sure they can police a protest properly. Let's have a look at this example from the same protest, and this is where a single police officer comes up to see what the protest is all about. I have a quick chat with him. I think that's enough for him to know, or to be able to judge, the type of policing response that's needed.
Morning everyone, how are you?
Sir, you can talk to me.
Hello, thank you very much, how are you? What's the intentions here?
So you can talk to me.
I'll talk to anyone, but yeah, go for it.
They're protesting.
Yeah, quite
They're keeping themselves in their own world, like part of the theatre of the protest.
Yep.
There aren't any police liaison rebels here. I can't really give you much more information than that.
Okay, what's the intentions? How long are we going to do it for? What's the plan? Or
I can't say. It's not. He has a look at the protesters. I say no comment in a nice way. I don't tell him to F off. So he's got an idea of the demeanour of the protests, and I'm sure that would have been enough for the police to do their job without needing any additional intelligence. Even though the police have quite stringent guidelines about what they can and cannot do, private companies have a lot more freedom. They may not be acting legally, but you know, if they're helping the police, who's going to complain? Well, here's one example where quite a high profile activist ends up being sent to prison because of an undercover operation by the Sun newspaper. Remember, the police are restricted against using undercover operations, or at least they're meant to be, because most protests do not warrant that level of scrutiny. And it's not just newspapers that use undercover techniques. The big oil companies and businesses that are involved in high carbon businesses have very good intelligence and good security as well. We received some positive comments from companies including HS2, Barclays and the Canary Wharf Group, which had formal procedures to give information to the police about potential protests. In some cases then, private companies are better informed about what might be happening with a protest than the police are. Now you might be a bit cross that the police is gathering up all this sensitive information about you or about people you know and storing on a database where maybe it's not justified, but at least you think, well, it's the police, they're accountable, there are rules about these things. But the police don't just keep this information on their database, they share this personal, sensitive information with private companies. In return, the police planners worked closely with businesses and had developed information sharing protocols. You might think, well, aren't the police meant to be impartial? Well, they are meant to be. They say, we do not favour one person or one group over another. At some protests, the police will tell you, we're impartial, we're only here to protect your right to protest. But some businesses are so powerful, the government will change the law to protect them. Here's one example, a single protest by Extinction Rebellion outside a newspaper printing press that was used by Rupert Murdoch's newspapers. It caused disruption, it disrupted one day's print run. For that one protest, the government changed the law, so for the first time, the Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act gives examples of what might amount to serious disruption to the life of the community. These include significant delay to the delivery of a time-sensitive product to consumers of that product, i.e. newspapers. So, for a big business, the government will change the law to protect you. The first time anyone stood up to Rupert Murdoch in Britain for the last 50 years, they changed the law to make sure you don't do it again. But it gets worse than that, because the anti-protest laws that have recently been brought in, I made a video about it before, it turns out they were written with the help of ExxonMobil. Rishi Sunak has admitted a right-wing think tank that received funding from US oil giant ExxonMobil helped the government write its draconian anti-protest laws. Until I started making the video, I didn't realise that most police officers do not like going to protests, quite often at the weekend, which disrupts their rest days. There's lots of standing around, possibly being verbally abused or even physically attacked. Also, there's lots of videoing and photographing going on that ends up on social media. The police do not like their privacy being compromised in that way. And also, when it comes to gathering intelligence, you know, most protesters know to say no comment. There are much easier ways for the police to find out much more information than spending all day trying to talk to people who won't talk to them. Intelligence gathering takes place before, during and after an event. In addition to overt intelligence gathering methods like open source research, googling things on the internet, or asking for information from the protest organiser or the community, there are more intrusive options available to the police. However, most protests are peaceful and conducted lawfully. In these circumstances, the use of such options cannot be justified. Officers told us that community intelligence is an important piece of the intelligence picture. We found that neighbourhood local policing teams play a major role in this. Most interviewees told us they were provided with valuable intelligence reports. These tended to include information that intelligence officers, we haven't found out about those, I don't know who they are, had collected from open source research about planned protests and protesters' intentions. So there are teams of police officers systematically searching for information about protests all the time. Commanders told us, in addition to these reports, from time to time they also receive useful intelligence updates during events from dedicated intelligence teams who must be watching the live streams. So the police have got social media and local police. So George, our friend Sergeant George, he's based at a local police station, and being a police liaison officer is only a part-time job. His main job is organising the 999 response police officers. Okay, so he gets called out once he's done his other duties. Well, here's our friend Sergeant George again. This time he's contacting his local Extinction Rebellion group using Facebook. George writes, "What's the plans for Saturday then? Will there be an update at all?" And the people at Extinction Rebellion, the local group, say, "Everyone who is concerned about climate and the ecological emergencies and is dedicated to peaceful protest is welcome to come to the protest. If you fit that description, then please come along. We're keen to grow the group. There won't be any updates. It will be our normal non-violent protest, respectful to the customers, public and to the police." Then George replies again, "I mean, what time will it start and finish? Should," spelt wrongly, "we brink," I think he means bring there, "should we brink drinks and food and stuff like that? Is there a toilet nearby? Lol. Is that appropriate language for a police sergeant?" And the protesters say, "It starts at 10 a.m. There's a pub within easy walking distance if you need to use the toilet. Apart from the pub, there's nowhere to buy food, so bring your own. Where are you coming from?" And then George replies with a local town. And the protesters say, "Okay, great." And George says, "Thanks," spelt in a sort of cool young person's way. And then he's very persistent, George, isn't he? He still wants to find out more stuff. He says, "Soz, me again, lol. Will you have those peeps on the bamboo or stick structures again, as it looked pretty cool? Cheers." Well, I think by this time the protesters must have clocked what's going on, because they reply, "Hi, plan is to meet at 10 a.m. at an undisclosed location. Kids are more than welcome if we'd like to bring them along." You might wonder, given the type of language he's using, how can we be so sure that it is our friend George? Well, because he's using his proper name and his personal Facebook account. And why is he doing that? Because, I think, if he was to use a false Facebook account and a different name, effectively he would be undercover. And as a police officer, with rules to make sure they act properly, he's not allowed to go undercover, so he has to use his real name. And one of us phoned up and complained. It's a very British rebellion. If I'd have complained, I'd be complaining about the use of language and his poor grasp of English. But remember, he's not acting wrongly. It's part of his job to contact the protest organisers beforehand and understand what the policing response will be, although he's doing it a bit secretly. And one day I went through all the people who clicked the like button on our Extinction Rebellion Facebook group, and I was surprised at the number of police officers and security guards of high carbon businesses had clicked that like button, was actively monitoring the page. Social media is such a good way for the police to gather evidence, is because there's so much of it. As a non-violent direct group, Extinction Rebellion lives and dies by its social media when it comes to getting the message out. And to give you an example of how powerful it could be, here's George publishing his own social media on the local police Facebook group. He's introducing himself, he's telling all about himself and the role he's had in the past. I see he's moved to a new office, and this new office is the office where I used to be based when I was a police support volunteer and did the speed watch coordination. The stories I could tell you about that, I've made a video about that as well. All I can say is he'll know a lot more about me now, having met the police officers there, than he did before. So I recommend that video. It's my favourite video and it doesn't get enough love, so I shall put a link in the video description. If the police and high carbon businesses are going to monitor your social media, it's a good way to communicate with them. If things go wrong, you can use it as a way to say sorry. Yesterday, at our action, 2 confrontational incidents occurred where the rebels involved did not respond with love and act in line with the principles of non-violence. After the action, our group reaffirmed our commitment to non-violence and came up with practical ways to deal with such situations in the future. Non-violence is not about defeating the opponent, but winning their friendship and understanding. Whoever wrote this has an excellent understanding of the principles of non-violence, I can see. There will always be a compromise between wanting as many people as possible to attend an action and ensuring everyone fully understands XR's principles and values. In future, before an action, we will discuss the responsibilities and privileges of being part of the Extinction Rebellion movement and make sure all involved commit to it, with love and in humility. We could tell the security guards at the high carbon business had read that, because their demeanour was completely changed and much more constructive and positive the next time they saw us. You can use it to announce protests. You can let the people you're protesting against know you're going to be there, and the security guards can know, so they can organise themselves a bit, because non-violent direct action is all about how something appears rather than what it really does. It's not sabotage. You don't want to cause real harm to a business. You just want to get in the newspapers, have some good social media. If you can let them know you're going along and your protests can still go ahead, why not? Also, sometimes when we went to protest for the first time against a particular big oil company, the security guards, you can tell, they didn't really know what Extinction Rebellion was all about. They seemed very defensive, so we can reassure them. The police officers were happy to engage with the protesters and discuss their concerns about the climate emergency. The security guards and contractors seemed less comfortable, covering their faces and filming the protesters the whole time the protest lasted. Extinction Rebellion is deeply committed to non-violence. We have no argument with the people who work for us. We are all part of a toxic system and no one person is to blame. And again, after that, the way they protected that site completely changed. Also, you can use it as a way to be nice to the security guards at the high carbon businesses. Remember, non-violence doesn't seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win their friendship. You need to respect the security guards. Outnumbered and fighting the noise of the drums, they had the good grace to chat in a friendly way with rebels blocking the main entrance. And again, you know, good relations continued. After I made the video, I remembered another way the police gather intelligence, and that's by monitoring Zoom calls. I can think of 2 instances where people have been arrested, and when they were interviewed by the police showed them the recording of the Zoom call. I don't know whether Zoom keep a recording of the calls that the police then ask for, or if the police record it in real time. And now we come to the third one, which is phones. The last time I was arrested, my phone was mentioned 3 times. I didn't have a phone on me, but when I was being searched at the van for the first search, it's called a section 32 search, the sergeant came up to the police officer who had arrested me and said, "Have you found his phone?" And the PC said, "No, but I've only done a section 32 search, so we'll find it at the police station." When we got to the police station, you're searched very thoroughly, but your property is searched, but they're only really looking for valuables that need to be recorded in case they go missing at the police station. When my property had been searched, my bag and the contents of my pockets, the police officer came back and said he hasn't got a phone. What's more mysterious is I'd been live streaming that day. I had an enormous bag of phone cables for Android or for iPhones, and in the police van on the way to the police station, the police had been asking if anyone had an iPhone cable, and I said, "Oh, I've got one, you're free to use." They said, "Oh, we can't use your property, sir." So it's a great mystery to me, what happened to my phone. Oh, and the next day when the police threw me out, the police sergeant very kindly wrote down the number of a taxi company. And then he said, but you haven't got a phone, have you? So why are the police so concerned about the phones of protesters? At one time it was thought that Android and iPhones were fairly secure. You've got a code number, they're more secure if you switch them off, and people thought iPhones are more secure than Android. But it now seems that the modern software the police use are able to get through that. They use two packages, one is called Celebrite and one is called Grey Key. Can the police get into a locked iPhone in the UK? iPhones tend to be more difficult to hack than other types of smartphones. However, Celebrite claims their technology can hack iPhones, even the latest versions. Can they always get in? Well, maybe they can get in up to about 89.6% of the time. And what are they going to get off your phone? Photographs, contacts, locations of where you've been. Also, once they've got your phone ID, in the future they can track where you are. So for example, if you're someone who does lots of live streaming, if your phone arrives in London early in the morning, they might think something's about to happen there, and it will tip them off. Most protesters either don't take a phone or they have what's called a burner phone, in that it has fewer contacts and less compromising. But it's still, really, it's best not to have your phone on you at all, I think. But are the police really interested in the phone of a lowly protester? The UK data regulator said in June it was concerned about the way in which police forces in the UK routinely access and extract the content of mobile phones. So yes, one barrister told me, who deals with a lot of drug cases, that the police could apply for what's called a RIPA permission, which is RIPA, and that means the police can take you to court, and if you don't tell them your access code to the phone, then you've committed a more serious crime. The police never use it because they can get into the phones anyway. I know one person who was invited to a police station to be interviewed. So they went along with their solicitor. After the interview, the solicitor went home. The person I know was then rearrested, put in the cells for 8 hours, while the police had their phone. When I was arrested without my phone, some of the people who were let out at the same time reported the police had forced them to unlock their phones in front of them. And once the police have got access to your phone, it's not just the contents of your phone they can use, but it gives them access to all your social media and all your secure messaging, because your messaging is encrypted when it's transmitted on your phone. Although it's encrypted, once they've got access to your phone, they can see all your messages, and they can go online using your social media accounts, which they've got access to through your phone, and they'll get more information than maybe you realise. Well, so far everything is theoretical, but how does that actually affect protests? Well, I can think of 2 examples where police surveillance led to protests being affected. One was when someone was arrested without realising they were going to be arrested. They had their phone on them. Their phone would have contained information that would have tipped the police off about a protest that was coming up. On the day of the protest, hundreds of police arrived beforehand, so the protest was abandoned. But all that happened in that case was the protest happened later on. So it was a bit, you have to ask yourself, did the police have any real benefit? And a second case was when some protesters went along to a site unannounced, without advertising it, and only a small group of trusted people knew. When they got to the site, the police were there waiting for them, plus some senior executives and possibly a legal advisor from the big oil company they were protesting against. If the police wanted to protect their surveillance techniques, or maybe the big oil company had been using more advanced techniques the police aren't really allowed to use for peaceful protesters, surely the police would have hidden around the corner, and then once the protesters arrived, they could arrive 2 minutes later and said things like, "Oh, we are surprised at the protest happening today, we had no idea it was going to happen." Instead, they were waiting there already, almost as a way to tell the protesters, "We're watching you." For a group like Extinction Rebellion, its roots lie in it being a mass movement, that its power and legitimacy all came from having lots of people, which meant information was very important and security was less important, because you wanted as many people as possible to turn up to all know what to do the same thing at the same time. But there are groups like, for example, Greenpeace, where their actions are much more spectacular and they use far fewer people, so for them it is more realistic to have good security. Looking back at the things that happened while making this video made me realise they weren't as bad as they seemed at the time. I can see now the police do have a legitimate need to understand the protest and how to police it. It doesn't help that the police liaison officers gather intelligence rather than just keep good communications with the protesters. But even if they did focus on their primary role and stop actively gathering intelligence, there'd still be police officers. They would still report back on anything they found out. And why not just tell the police everything? Well, because you don't know how the intelligence will be used. It will be stored away. It might get someone else into trouble. And also, a protest is a cooperative thing, in that the police and the protesters cooperate to make sure the protest is safe and non-violent. But a protest is also a competitive thing. Extinction Rebellion, or people of any protest, want to have their protest. Maybe they want to cause disruption. And the police will always want to stop that, because, you know, that's what their job is. What's curious is the protesters don't like being filmed or monitored by the police, and the police don't like going to protests because they don't like being filmed and having their faces published on social media. So everyone at a protest is really in the same boat. Also, there are legal controls that limit the sorts of things the police can do, so maybe it's not quite as bad as I thought. Remember, I'm not an expert in these things. I make these videos because I want to understand them better. I'm not the doctor, I'm the patient. Having said that, a police force is a political organisation. Its objectives are set by the Home Secretary. They're accountable to the public. They're always going to act in a political way. Sadly though, just as I've understood what's going on and found some peace of mind because of it, by understanding the world better, things take a bit of a concerning twist. Those days where surveillance had to be proportional to the types of protests, and there were rules to make sure the police weren't over-oppressive, it seems that things are going to get worse. Now, so far, most of that is personal experience, but now we get to a new section, which is this new thing called Aggravated Activism. It's partly brought in using a law that was sponsored or indirectly sponsored by ExxonMobil, and for the first time we can see how the police are now judging protests. Now, they do it in two ways. First of all is the obvious way. They say at one end of the scale we have peaceful protesters who are completely law-abiding. Then maybe we have peaceful protesters who commit acts of civil disobedience, who break the law in a very non-violent, controlled way to show how concerned they are about things. And right at the other end of the scale you've got terrorism. So you can judge how much intelligence should be applied to each group. So if you're a terrorist, you get the anti-terrorist police, which I'm guessing have much more freedom to surveil you. But there's a second way the police also judge how much attention you deserve, and that's what you're asking for. So it's called the ideological outcome. So for example, if you want to get people to stop testing products on animals, they would describe that as a low-level thing. If you want to change the economic system, possibly because it's destroying our environment and helping to create climate change, then suddenly that's you're a much more serious type of protester, even though you're peaceful. So the police are sort of making value judgments about what type of protesters they like and what they don't like, and then they're treating them differently accordingly. Well, this gives the police a lot of scope to decide how to tackle groups like Extinction Rebellion, because they could claim, oh, they're much more serious than they really are, because who's going to hold them to account? But if you see this yellow box that's called Low-Level Aggravated Activism, which is the one where the anti-terrorist police don't start paying you attention, well, the yellow box is defined as one that's tackled by the National Police Coordination Centre. If you're in the category of low-level aggravated activism, you are likely to come to the attention of the National Police Coordination Centre and face increased surveillance. If you are labelled high-level, however, this means you are dealt with by officers from the counter-terrorism policing and are more likely to face harassment, surveillance and disruption. How is Extinction Rebellion judged? The National Police Coordination Centre also coordinate nationally significant protests. For example, protests involving groups such as Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, Animal Rebellion and anti-vaccine protests. And what is it that the National Police Coordination Centre does? The Strategic Intelligence and Briefing Team provide intelligence support focused on assessing strategic threats from protest and provide daily and weekly intelligence reports to forces and across forces and government for major events and incidents. So there's an entire industry or at least a whole police department dedicated to keeping groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil under surveillance, and they have daily reports and weekly reports that go right up to the government. And what is it they're trying to stop? People who walk in the road, who make the windows a bit dirty, who block the entrances to big fossil fuel companies, who turn up unexpectedly in the woods. It does seem a bit of an overreaction, doesn't it? It's almost as though they were trying to please the big oil companies who had provided money to produce the new anti-protest laws. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win.